Could we be seeing a complete change in the election results? About 60% of nonpartisan voters are unhappy with the current governor's handling of the pandemic. Hello everyone, hope everybody is doing well. If you are new to this channel, we welcome you to subscribe, share this video, let your whole friends know, because in these turbulent times, we do need a lot of independent voices to really out-track the establishment media, which, by the way, I don't believe this is a real independent source. We know that it is the deep state, the corrupt politicians, Wall Street, all these other interests that basically control much of the world. Again, this is just not some conspiracy theory. We're seeing it with the income inequality, networking in Nevada. I've shown you this banner many, many times. The powers that be, they control the major corporations. In other words, it's really Jim Murren that's in charge. Sisolak and Sandoval, they're just puppets. And you can say that about Harry Reid. Actually, you can argue Harry Reid, in fact, is directing what a lot of these politicians are supposed to do. It's very, very simple. And obviously, Jim Murren and Harry Reid are total buddies. They're probably sitting and dining right now. They constantly do business together. We know that it's the financial system, the Federal Reserve, Wall Street banks, that are responsible for these economic cycles, these housing boom and bust systems, where they have a lot of control of these home builders. This is where I talk about all this unaffordability, poor quality architecture, dysfunctional urban planning. They heavily control both parties. It's very, very simple. And obviously, they control a lot of these casinos. They provide massive numbers of campaign contributions. They lobby for massive immigration. Increasingly, they're pandering to identity politics because, again, more and more of us are waking up, so they need to fill in their deficits. So obviously, over time, when people found out that Harry Reid was a crook, he realized he was losing support, so he had to do one thing. One is to manipulate the elections. In other words, rig the system. You flood many people in Clark County, so you have central control, too much control by one county. Number two, you bring in new voters. That's essentially what a lot of these NGOs like the Culinary Union did. Remember, this union is responsible for these margins of victories for a lot of these politicians. Harry Reid, Sisolak, and yes, they even supported Brian Sandoval. So over time, when you find out that they were essentially lobbying for low taxes and regulations, so, whenever you see, okay, Nevada has a great business climate, I believe they were trying to do that to make sure that these elites are not able to pay a lot of taxes and regulations, but over time, they want to put the costs and the restrictions among everyday people like ourselves. Remember, Sisolak is a puppet, just like Joe Biden. He's a puppet. We know it's Wall Street elites that heavily control them. This, again, is where they're increasingly going to the SJW, the wokeness culture. The list goes on and on. And this is one of the reasons why they keep supporting open borders, massive immigration. They obviously, all these NGOs, the Asian Community Development Council, Mi Familia Vota, they're largely responsible for the shutdowns, the mask mandates. Not allowed to call in to a meeting that has to do with redistricting of the county boundaries in terms of districts and representation. Now think about that. So they tell us that you want us to stay at home, but at the same time, if you want to bring your opinions and display your voice, you can't call into a county meeting, but you can call into a state meeting. This is just absolutely the double standards that we're witnessing in. But remember, all these NGOs, politicians, and especially corporations are going to be held accountable and responsible over time. And of course, in this video where I speak about Jim Murren, they essentially try to shut me down, which further proves me right. Brian Sandoval. And again, remember, these labels don't really mean anything. Keep this in mind. A lot of people don't even see Sisolak as a Democrat. They're basically part of the same team. Now, one of the reasons why Democrats have been increasingly winning these elections is because they're becoming more of the party establishment. The Democrats have been losing the typical working class voter, like the days of FDR, and they're now moving towards identity politics and wokeness. So, like I told you, this is why they're trying to import more voters. Now it seems like the party of the anti-establishment is the Republicans. So the sellout Brian Sandoval has teamed up with Sisolak to push vaccine mandates and passports. And by the way, I recall interviewing this guy back in 2013 and 14 saying that Sandoval is responsible for many scandals that the media did not want to report. So remember, these people are still on the hook of other scandals. So it's not just if the jabs are going to fail, we're going to have to be doing more investigations. The former governor has used his power to UNR to require vaccine passports at men's and women's basketball games. The policy will take in November 9th and November 10th with the women's basketball season. Like the Raiders, who have been allowed to remove the mask mandate from the stadium in exchange of banning unvaccinated Nevadans, UNR will be allowed the governor to hold maskless home games in exchange for banning unvaccinated people and setting up vaccine clinics outside of their games. And by the way, I have heard a good number of corruption in Reno. I wouldn't be surprised. Somebody just told me how the illegal alien who killed some people in Reno about 2 years ago, they had some ties to the mining and the Tesla plant. Correct me if I'm wrong, and again, anything is possible. So he tweets this out: so glad to see Nevada athletics. They want to jab all these people 12 and older. They have to show proof of COVID vaccination. It's still pending state approval. This brain-dead moron Sandoval, of course, he knows is all a scam. Since he himself was fully vaccinated, still caught COVID, attended a Raiders game while he had COVID, and potentially spreading the virus to thousands of people in the stadium. But none of this is about spreading the virus, as we covered for the last 18 to 20 months. A familiar group that seemed not only behind the Nevada mandates is profiting from them as well. Now remember, like I told you, MGM Resorts was one of the largest campaign contributors to Brian Sandoval as well as Dean Heller, and I think Adam Laxalt as well, although Adam Laxalt got a lot of money from the Adelson. Sandoval is part of what we like to call the Jim Murren MGM Resorts Crime Syndicate, a group of executives under Jim Murren's command, which of course we know they're tied to Wall Street, a deep state, that have managed to hijack our government. And like I said, this was all being planned from the 1990s when we started to see the mega resort boom, the casino consolidation. You have like 2 casinos that control like 60% of the strip or something. Of course, when the COVID hit, Sandoval uses connections and MGM and government officials to land a job at president of UNR, which makes him over $500,000 a year to help Sisolak to push the MGM agenda. And then, of course, he joined the president of the Global Gaming Development a day after he was leaving office. So it's easy. It's a revolving door. Remember, these are the same executives who sued the victims of the Las Vegas shooting, paid parking, sold stock before the incident, and even after these disgusting actions, Murren, after countersuing them, was made head of the Sisolak COVID task force to enrich himself, his friends, and shut down his competitors. And he doesn't hide the fact that MGM owns the Nevada government, and he's been bragging about it a couple of years back. Well, it's no wonder why they hate us so much. It's very easy to see all of this.
There's a great opportunity to do that and quickly there. So what we're doing in terms of, we change laws. How easy is it to change a law in New York State? I don't know. But when you're the largest employer and the largest taxpayer in the state of Nevada, we can get laws changed pretty quickly. And we regularly do it.
A lot of things I've been telling you for years has actually been happening, but it's a good news that people are having an awakening. The question is, can we finally reverse this trend? Just look at what's going on. Look, segregated black-only food festival. And keep this in mind. The reason why we have a black population is, again, immigration from the Horn of Africa and not to mention California gentrification. This is all you have to know. And we have to get the truth out as much as we can. So, moving on, let's just take a look at the polls. You can see here. Now, obviously, Nevada Independent is run by John Ralston. We obviously know they're going to have bias towards Sisolak and Cortez Masto. They're going to say, ooh, they have slim leads over likely GOP opponents. Keep this in mind. And these were similar results that were done in 2018 or 16, but they're not denying the fact that Joe Biden's approval rating is right now at 35 to 42%. It's just absolutely disgusting. It's funny because I saw a clip from Don Jr. on Instagram where it shows like Chris Farley actually falling down the cliff, and it's going from 54 all the way down to 0 in a very fast period of time. But Biden's approval rating is falling fast. It's fallen a lot faster what I originally thought. I don't trust a lot of these polls. They can be wrong, definitely. They can be skewed. And we're going to show other pieces of evidence that they just brought out that may show that their polls are quite misleading. The issue with this poll, you can see here, Steve Sisolak leads Dean Heller and Joe Lombardo. Now, the problem with all this, of course, is the fact that why did they poll Lombardo and Heller? Because a lot of people like me are not going to support either of these politicians. If they were to support the other guy, which I believe I've met him in person, and his name is Joey Gilbert, or perhaps Michelle Fiore. Again, this article was done about a week ago, just a few days before Michelle Fiore began to run. We would vote for those two people, and if Heller and Lombardo was on the ticket, we would not support them. In fact, I would rather, I guess, support Sisolak because I want his second term to be a complete, utter failure, so then we can finally get a much, much better Republican candidate, or who knows, third party. Certainly that's the thing. And Cortez Masto holds a 4-point lead. Now, as you can see here, Cortez Masto has a larger lead than Sisolak. So Sisolak is really, really going to be in trouble. Now, they even admit that this is a worrying sign of Nevada Democrats. And again, we're starting to see rumors that Nancy Pelosi is going to resign, who have won in the vast majority of the top-line races in the state since the 2016 election cycle. COVID-19 is a hostile election environment, 600 likely voters, 30 as registered Republican, 35 registered Democrat, and 35% nonpartisan, or another party. And I think this is a good balance because there's a little bit more Democrats than Republicans. And keep that in mind, I believe Florida has more registered Democrats than Republicans. And look at their results. I think the main difference is because Florida does not have one county that constitutes 75% of the politicians, which is very vulnerable for rigging and cheating, or whatever you want to call. And this is from a non-major party poll sample where they have Heller practically tied, and you can see Lombardo is actually behind Sisolak. Masto is about slightly ahead of Laxalt. Then again, you have to keep in mind, will the Democrats turn out, especially the young folks? This is all very, very important. And again, I've told you this before, a lot of these politicians are really, really out of touch. They don't have a town hall meeting, and as soon as one of their constituents try to see you, they try to keep her away from you. It's all about essentially being out of touch and taxation without representation. Again, no polls for, nevertheless, Joey Gilbert. Keep that in mind. And they don't even have a poll for, believe it or not, Sam Brown. So my question is, who's supporting the Laxalts and the Hellers? Now you can see here that even this poll even admits that Joe Biden has an unfavorable rating than favorable in the state of Nevada. Think about this. Statewide voters. Of course, it's larger for Donald Trump. You can see here the favorability for these Democrats are not even the majority. Sisolak, the unfavorable is larger than the favorable. And you can see here that there's a lot of them that don't even have an opinion. So really the issue is here that a lot of people don't even know Joey Gilbert. So if these people really want to get out there they would probably have to basically stand out from the crowd. So you can see here, 76% of people don't know who he is, as opposed to Adam Laxalt as 41%. So we're going to have to make sure that Joey Gilbert is well known from the public. You can see that about 12% of Nevadans believe this country is in the wrong track. Absolutely. Only 35% of youth believe is on the let's see right here, on the right direction, excuse me. And hardly anybody out of these polls, with the exception of Democrats, believe that the country is actually in the right track. Now it's funny because Democrats, obviously in the nation, are less likely than Nevada Democrats to see if they're actually on the right track. Now, why could that be? Because what this is telling you is that perhaps Democrats are more likely to wake up in other states than the state of Nevada. This is probably because, again, the NGOs, the unions, or whatever, are a lot more important. Look at this. 56% of Nevada Democrats believe this country's on the right track, as opposed to 39%. So it seems like Nevada Latinos are more in line with Joe Biden than Latinos all across the country. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of Latinos who live in the border areas are really getting fed up with all this. Lombardo is less known, but again, who supports Lombardo? Remember how he just handled the Route 91 incident. And of course, Lombardo was not doing good of a job to make sure that criminal illegal aliens are reported to ICE. Keep this in mind. Now let's take a look at this. The views of Joe Biden. Again, he has a -1 net favorability, but his job performance is very low. It's likely that we're going to see the turnout is going to be pretty miserable in the next year midterms. Joe Biden has a net favorability of obviously +87 by Democrats, but job performance is lagging. And look at this, favorability and performance is similar with the GOP. You can see here how men don't seem to like him. Young people seem to like him, but his job performance is very lagging. See, I don't know how this makes sense, but I do believe because of that, the youth are not going to be turning out. Latinos have among the highest job performance at +35, or favorability at +35. Job performance is at -15, which is essentially the rural. It's at -42%. It's absolutely pretty shocking. Donald Trump, -8%. You can see only 5% of Democrats found him favorable. You can just go down the line. Now look at how high the number is for the GOP. You see, this is what I'm trying to say. A lot of people in the party were not necessarily a fan of him in the state. With Clark and Washoe County doesn't make that much of a difference, despite the fact that Clark County has vastly demographics in Washoe County. That he's pretty even among the 40 and over group, but when it comes to young people, not so well. But Latinos is pretty low. Now, among the rest of the country, I heard it's about 40%. Remember, they said even 40% voted to recall Newsom. So Republicans really need to act up with the Hispanic base. But remember, we know a larger share of them are part of the unions, and a larger share of them are connected or actually illegal aliens. You can see here negative favorability of Sisolak is at -3%, job performance at -22%. And he's only doing decent among the young folks, right? So they have to turn out in this election, but all the other ones are not doing very well. He's favorable among women, yeah. Yeah, considering how he treated women back in the past. And a lot of people, it's only +48 that really like his job performance. It's unbelievable. Look at this. Latinos find him favorable at +32. Saying, again, this is what they are doing right here. They're constantly pandering to these people. AAPI, they have an Asian Council, MGM Resorts Minority Affairs. Look at this. This is the Fat Cow illegal alien tool, Harry Reid whore, Astrid Silva. Look who they represent. It's unbelievable. You just go down the line. Clark County has a net favorability rate of only +6. -14, wow, for Washoe County. Look how the gap is really, really wide. It's only +6. And by the way, that still means you have at least 40% of the county that's not favorable of him. And yet we're supposed to believe that Dems have a very large portion of the seats of the legislature? Oh my gosh. So Sisolak rating of the pandemic, you can see here is at -21. Wow. And you can see here how, look at this, Hispanic votes. Wow, there's really not much of a difference between positive and negative compared to his, as you can see here, his favorability rate. So they don't think he handled the pandemic. And by the way, wait until we see the truth about the vaccines and what's it going to do long term, or you can just call them jabs or whatever. It's 61% negative among whites. You don't see that much of a difference between white and Hispanic. You can see here negative pretty high among Clark County. Rest of the county, unbelievable. Look at this. And then youth, they're more likely. It's astonishing how they found him more favorable overall, but they're less likely to find him favorable of the handling of the pandemic than the elderly people. See, this makes me think like, well, are these polls are actually accurate? Good, decent 27% of Democrats don't find him favorable when it comes to the handling of the pandemic. Cortez Masto does have a +5 favorability rate, but his job performance is -16. And look, everybody except for Democrats find her job performance not very, very well, including Latinos, including youth, including women. But as you can see here, Latinos still find her favorable at +28 because obviously you got the unions and the pandering and so forth. You can see here how there's also a gap between among independents and Democrats. The Democrat Party is somewhat less unpopular than Republicans. It's really interesting to see. So they're not finding the Republican Party so favorable among the youth. You can go down the list. You've got right here obviously Clark County is only at +7. Latinos at +33. Wow. Keep this in mind. Heller obviously holds a single-digit lead in the gubernatorial primary. You can see her at 0.54. They find him favorable. Of course, you have to ask yourself, why would people support Heller and Joe Lombardo more than Joey Gilbert? It's absolutely hard to really believe. Strong factor is very, very high among Joey Gilbert and is still relatively comparative to Heller and Lombardo. Remember, a lot of people don't know who Joey Gilbert actually is. Dean Heller and Lombardo is very competitive among the youth, like myself. Joey Gilbert is not doing very well among people who are over 60 years old. Maybe because older people, they can't change their mind. They're still glued to the Republican establishment. Maybe because they see that, well, Trump supported Heller. Maybe they actually think that, well, he's probably the better candidate or has the better chance of defeating Sisolak. I don't really see that because Heller has a long history of selling out. Remember, they get similar donors along with Lombardo. And I believe they, correct me if I'm wrong, he gave some support to illegal aliens. Now, among women, Joey Gilbert is doing pretty well. Keep this in mind. However, it's Clark Counties where Joey Gilbert is really lagging, despite a lot of the support I see all across the county. Washoe County is doing pretty decent, believe it or not. You can see how Hispanic voters, somehow despite disapproving of the pandemic, they find Sisolak a lot more favorable. Keep this in mind. This is all you really need to know. It's just really hard to really take these polls really seriously when you think about it. Let's go down the list. Of course, 91% are going to support Sisolak. It's Democrats. You can go down right here. Women, Sisolak over Dean Heller. But once again, they have him hold Joey Gilbert. Sisolak still leads Latinos at 64%, barely even leading in Clark County and Sisolak. Lombardo is winning among the people who are over 40, the same with obviously Heller. So like I said, it really depends on the youth turnout. Masto has a clear lead in Clark County, although many independents, like I said, remain undecided. Because we'll have to really see when the truth comes out about the pandemic, about the virus, the border crisis, Afghanistan, the list basically goes on. Inflation, you name it. The economy, the unemployment rate is very high. I almost forgot about that. Since the 1950s, you think American culture has really changed for the worse, changed for the better? A lot of people say for the worse. So again, in a way, we're still quite conservative, believe it or not. That includes Latinos. That even includes people who are 18 to 39 years old. And that includes a large number of Republicans and a decent number of Democrats too, believe it or not. And again, a majority of people in Clark County. Government is doing too many things, better left for better and individuals. Again, more want less government. 60% still want abortion to be legal. Hey, abortion again goes with the demographics to keep whites a majority. There's an economic system that serves the powerful interests. 67% agree. Maybe we can use that against Sisolak. Absolutely. 79% of Latinos, higher than whites, believe it or not. So maybe that's how people like me can appeal to them. Across the board among all age categories. Women are more likely to see that. And Democrats are very high. But Republicans, about 50%. So it's kind of interesting how Republicans are really starting to see that corporations are working against them. Immigrants are strengthening society. Now, this is one thing I don't like about Nevada, about, like I said, close to 50%, 57% of Latinos, even about whites. Look at the gap between college and non-college. And again, the gap is very high among youth. So the youth are aware about the wealthy and special interests, but they don't realize that somehow, well, the wealthy and special interests are pushing mass immigration. Keep this in mind. And women are more likely to buy into this, of course. Now, on the other hand, we see the majority of people don't see racism as an epidemic. Latinos, majority of them see systemic racism. Whites don't. It's even in Clark County. You can see here the youth is almost about the same. Racism leading. You can see how this country is increasingly getting really divided over time. We need more police to deter and catch criminals, 60%. And again, look, 37% of Democrats, 59% of Latinos, interesting, and majority of young people. So defund the police is not very popular. By the way, I almost forgot to tell you about Michelle Fiore, believe it or not. It's very important to know that obviously she has a lot of baggage. Keep this in mind. I'm not going to lie to you about some of the comments she made about her attitude. My real concern about Fiore is the fact that, well, attitude, the way she is, some of the accusations she's gotten. I mean, she has some baggage. I mean, I appreciate her support going all the way back to, the Bundy years, voting against the commerce tax. Of course, I would prefer her over Heller and Lombardo, but I would not prefer her over Joey Gilbert. Now, the question is, will she take votes away from Joey Gilbert? That's a $64,000 question. I hope she can take votes away from Heller and Lombardo, so then that way, essentially Joey Gilbert or her can at least be the nominee. And it's going to be pretty good, interesting to see that a Las Vegas councilwoman, the largest city in the state, with the backing of Carolyn Goodman, very likely, is going to defeat Steve Sisolak. So there's going to be a lot of fighting going on within Clark County, and we should be able to take the rest of the counties very easily. So they say that Joe Biden won fairly, about 54%. Obviously, I'm not going to really get into that. Look at this. Huge, not so much gaps between age, gaps between the parties. A decent gap among races, yes. Most except Republicans favor mask mandates. Now, this is pretty disappointing at 60%. You can see here, it's the lowest among 40 to 59-year-olds. Remember, elderly are very concerned about their health, and the youth are more likely to be brainwashed. So it's the middle-age group that seems to be getting it a lot more. The lesser majority favor vaccine mandates. So it's pretty even among age groups. It's not doing about the same among the elderly, like I've told you before. Latinos are more likely to favor vaccine mandates. And it's not a huge difference in between Clark County and the rest of the state. But there's a huge partisan divide. Is there a possibility that these scumbags are probably going to cheat? Now, we have to see the long-term effects of the audit. Again, I'm not 100% sure exactly what happened last year. But if there's an audit and if there's widespread fraud, then likely that a lot of these new policies, this cheating, this mail-in vote system. And again, I confronted this guy who introduced the mail-in votes and he got scared and started to walk away from me. His name is Jason Frierson, that bill. They're going to do what they can to kind of skew the results in their favor. But if the courts strike it down, if there's proven that there's fraud and the vaccines has been total failure, then we're pretty much going to see what's exactly going to happen. All right, everybody, thank you guys so much. Please share these videos as you can.